I'd like to invite Daniel Raim, Alisa Solomon, and Neva Small up.
Yeah. Neva Small, everyone.
Thank you, Juliet.
Alisa Solomon.
Daniel Raim, Neva Small. Well, hi, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to moderate this conversation. We'll talk maybe for like 20 minutes and then take questions from all of you. And thank you. There's so much to say, and I'm a little bit on Spielkes after, or not more verklempt, I'd say, like after seeing this. Congratulations, Daniel. It's a beautiful film.
Thank you.
There's so much going on here. Lots of places to start. Well, as another musical suggests, let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. I know that, in earlier films, you made a film about Robert Boyle earlier, yes. Who's a key figure in this film. And you've made other films about sort of people behind the scenes in movie production. Yeah. So how did you come to this film?
It started by seeing the film. I didn't come to this film through the theater, through the Broadway production. I hadn't seen it. I hadn't seen any theatrical version. I saw the movie with my grandparents. I think I was 12, 13. And for me, it was sort of immediately resonated with me on so many levels, just transported through the music and the storytelling and Neva's performances, and certainly, and also the connection to my own family's history, coming great-grandparents that didn't survive the Holocaust, and to the left of the TV were their portraits. So I'm trying to absorb all this and make sense. So I came to this, and then a few years later, when I met the production designer at the American Film Institute, I interviewed him and Norman Jewison 22 years ago about their process finding the location. So my mind was already opened up and curious to learn more.
And one thing I maybe should have said when we started is that yesterday was Sheldon Harnick's 98th birthday. Yeah. So tip the hat to Sheldon.
Yeah. He's doing great. I just saw him this afternoon, and it was lovely to see him, and he's doing great.
Right. And Neva, we hear a little bit about your background coming into the film in it, but I know you were already singing as a child. You already were performing at like the City Opera and on Broadway. Yeah, but what did it mean to you to be cast in Fiddler on the Roof? What do you remember about that?
Well, here we are, 50 years plus more, and I think my parents were right because they told me it's going to be your calling card forever, and that turned out to be true. I did a lot of kind of things that similar to what the Jewish Theater Company here at the JCC does with youth. I did the Jewish Theater for Children instead of Hebrew School, which was fine with me. And I did do lots of theater. Later, I went on to do the English Yiddish musical, The Golden Land, by the same producers who did the Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish. And both Rosalind Harris and I are on that Fiddler on the Roof CD, singing the song that was cut before Matchmaker. And I also did a musical set in the Yiddish theater. So it's been a part of me all along.
Mm-hmm. What was the song that was cut that you guys sang on there? For love, and instead of Matchmaker, it was a song about how they wanted to marry for love, as opposed to Matchmaker. Yeah, which good switch, right?
Yeah. I think there were a lot of changes in Detroit.
Yes, indeed. So there's a lot about process in this film. It's one of the things that's so interesting about the documentary, that you really get into that behind-the-scenes nitty-gritty of design and location and the marble dust and those kinds of things. What was your process like making this film?
Yeah. speaking just quickly, I'll dive into that. Just it was so fun to intercut you and John Williams talking about your process of how you got the playback, you got the tapes. So and then the playback. I'd love to hear more on that. My process making this film was fundamentally finding a story that I felt that because I'd been so focused on making movies about cinema artists and profiling cinema artists, I felt this was my way into Fiddler, right? And it's zeroing in on, and I don't know that fans of Fiddler on the Roof are thinking, boy, I'd love to learn more about Norman Jewison, right? But I would, and that was my process. Kind of went through that interview with him when he said, I found myself making Fiddler on the Roof. I wanted to learn what that meant. And so the process was, doing the interviews I did with him, but also finding the Directors Guild of America did an interview with Norman and trying to piece together and investigate and peel that onion until we get to something meaningful about his journey. And also, when I interviewed Neva, Michelle, and Roz, that process was interesting. First of all, it was the pandemic. So I interviewed you through there was an iPad over the lens of a cinema camera, and we met. But I feel like I've known you now for 2 years because I've lived with you every day.
That's true.
And my process for that was in the edit. Like, so you have these interviews, but in the edit, when I started to weave together your collective story, I was so moved by that, by the discovery of your voices and your humanity and and what you brought to Norman's vision, and decided that I think that's going to be like an important element to this story of bringing Fiddler to the big screen.
Which was a surprise, I think, for us. We thought, maybe we'd have a couple of lines along the way, never dreaming that it would be kind of a concentric storyline.
In what ways, like Norman Jewison, did you find yourself in the making of this film?
Such a great question. Well, I think 50 years from now, someone can come and ask me that question. I can explore that. How did I find myself? I think that the question of Jewish identity definitely was something that being born in Israel, with grandparents and great grandparents from Eastern Europe that didn't survive the Holocaust, and being married. I got married in 2006. My wife Jennifer is not Jewish, and so I wanted to work on this documentary as a way to reconcile some of these themes. And I asked Sheldon when I sat with him, said, Sheldon, what is your bit? He's like, yeah, I married, my wife's not Jewish, and my father didn't come to the wedding. And some of these tensions and experiences that he went through is reflected in his, in the writing and the themes. I'd love for you to speak to that too. Please.
Well, I'm not going to speak to it personally, but yeah, I mean, I think sure. When the original Broadway show came out in 1964, it was very much at a moment when American Jewry was asking itself that question. A lot of the Jewish papers were running articles on the question of intermarriage and what would it mean. How would Jews survive? What would it mean? Because of course this was the post-war period when colleges, quotas for Jews ended at a lot of colleges, and so Jews were kind of getting out more into and moving into suburbs that weren't Jewish enclaves, urban enclaves, and so therefore there was more mixing, more dating, more intermarriage, and this was like a primary concern in the mid-'60s and beyond. So I think that among many other themes, the show and then the film, spoke directly to that.
And thank you. And I'd like to add that to your question. So Fiddler on the Roof had such. I mean, like I said, I came to Fiddler through the movie, only in 2009 did I see Chaim Topol's farewell tour in the stage version, and I had a different reaction. I thought, that's not the same as the movies. So I didn't have the same visceral, powerful reaction. But the movie had such a profound impact on my young brain that I felt in my later life, boy, am I betraying God? Am I betraying the Jewish faith by having an interfaith marriage? My wife, and then we're looking at Norman Jewison's story, and we're also looking at a story set 50 years ago, today in 2022, when this can't happen. A non-Jew is not going to make Fiddler on the Roof. Let's talk about it, because so I think there is a story of identity. There's a story of finding oneself.
Yeah, and of course, Norman Jewison at that time had been, right before he made Fiddler, I think, I'm sure you know way more about this than I do, Dan, he was going to make Confessions of Nat Turner.
That's right.
Based on the novel by...
I don't remember.
Styrone. It's William Styrone. Thank you. And even then, there was a lot of first of all, there was the novel was controversial, but there was a lot of pressure from the African American community about a white man making that film, but not an issue for him.
Not an issue for him here, right?
Neva, had you seen Fiddler on stage?
Yeah, this is kind of a funny story. As we mentioned, I was a stage child, and I could not get an audition for Fiddler on the Roof for the youngest daughters. And eventually they cast Pia Zadora.
Right.
Now, Pia is very far from, they said I wasn't Jewish enough from being Jewish, and she became my understudy later in a Broadway musical called Henry Sweet Henry by Bob Merrill. But so that was the story. I couldn't get an audition for that.
But did you see it?
Oh, yes, definitely.
What kind of impression did it make on you?
Oh, yeah, the wonderful impression. I read all the Shalom Aleichem, and as a teenager, I read a lot of Holocaust memoirs, a lot. And there were people in our circle, I grew up here on the West Side, who had come and were Holocaust survivors and were getting reparations, and so had the numbers on their arms. So it was always something that was a part of my identity.
The film, as we all know, and as you demonstrate here as well, I mean, it's still so relevant and powerful to so many people, and yet not only did it not win the Oscar for Best Picture, as you allude to, the reviews when it first came out were not that good. Right. They were, and Norman Jewison was quite disappointed, and there was a campaign from the studio to counter some of the reviews and get some more positive stuff in the press. And you use that quote from Pauline Kael at the beginning, where she says it's the most powerful movie musical ever made. I looked up her review this morning, and that line comes after she says, "It is not especially sensitive, it is far from delicate, and it isn't even particularly imaginative." Like, whoa, Pauline. But I wonder why you think, half a century later, why was it met with mostly lukewarm reviews, even though, as we see, it has remained more powerful and I would say more popular and well known than the film that did win the Oscar for Best Picture that year, which was The French Connection.
Right. What it's enduring power. It's so Vincent Canby, I think, wrote the biggest pan, right, for the New York.
I think it was the Times.
Could be the New York Times, right? And I suddenly just forget the big take he had on it, but.
Well, he thought that it was too realistic. Like,
Yeah,
it didn't translate. It didn't translate to film. He kind of used the stage production to
Well, there you
beat
go.
it over the head.
Yeah.
And say there was something fanciful about it on stage, and it was just too, plotting on film. I think that was his critique.
It is a long film with an intermission, which was
Yes.
unusual in a movie theater to take an intermission.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because it was one of the last Roadshow pictures. Maybe you can tell us about the Roadshow. Probably there are people here who remember them, but that was a.
I've only read about it, but I wanted to ask Neva, and on the long lines of your question, what was it like for you being on, like, having seen the Broadway production? How did you feel about the reality that Norman Jewison and Robert Boyle were creating, that environment? What was your response?
Well, it was wonderful. And as you can see, and as I mentioned, it was so nice that you used that part of my response. You see Norman Jewison? He plays Arthur Krim, the producer. He plays Bobby Kennedy. And then he moves on to Ben Gurion, President Ben Gurion. Did you see all that? So for me, being there in Eastern Europe, and I did, once again, a lot of research, and I learned to speak some of the language. And being in that village, Lekenek, which was 45 minutes from Zagreb, and let's not forget Molly Pecan and her husband, who were there, and my next-door neighbors in the hotel, all of it added to being able to create the roles as we did. And Tupple was a great help, because those were some pretty dramatic scenes Chava carries in Act Two. And he was great help, as was Norman, of course.
What did he do to help?
He was very, very there for me, very, very there for me. It was pretty intense doing those scenes with the camera crew around. And I know after I finished the scenes, I went on my own away and I wept. And I had a cassette in those days, and I would listen to Brahms' Violin Concerto in D major over and over. I don't know why. It did something for me. I still love it. But those were my little tricks.
It was the Get Out Chava, right, the Chava scene that. Can you speak more to that?
Oh, you mean when the boys are harassing her walking
Oh
around?
no, when you're basically the scene when Topol is.
What you mean when she's trying to plead with him and he's
Yeah.
like, no, Hava, no.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
You talked a little bit about that with me earlier.
Well, once again, if you go back to the man with the pencil, as we say, Shalom Aleichem, you'll find all the Gemütlichkeit. Did I say it right? Anyone help me? You'll find all the heart and soul in those texts, and in Sheldon and Joe Stein's beautiful translation of that. And those are the things that helped me to create what we see and what Chava experiences. I wasn't really a great dancer, but in the Chava Ballet, Tommy Abbott, who you see in a lot of those group shots where Norman Jewison is suggesting directions, the choreographer, he said, just run like you're gonna catch a bus. Now, Leonard Fry was a mischief maker, because I had my little notes, as I'm telling you about, for my background, and he would grab my little pad in the Chava Ballet, and he would start making pornographic drawings right before we're going on camera. He was a mischief maker.
Do you remember when Topol shouted no, Hava, no at you? Was it scary? Did it?
Well, I was in the character, and yes, very, very heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, that kind of rejection, of course.
One of the things that you say in beautifully in dance film is you talk about the number of people who have over the years talked about how connected they've felt to you. They've played the part in high school or through those connections, and I imagine that there are a number of people who feel those kinds of connections as well. So I haven't been timing us, but maybe it's time to take your questions.
We'll have. You can just.
Three things. She wasn't identified on screen, but in one of those shots, Bette Midler, Adrienne Barbeau is one of the other daughters. So I just noticed that. What you said about the length, and also, I don't know if anyone remembers this, and you may not believe me, but I think in about 10 years after there was a re-release of the movie in theaters, and they did two things that I remember. They switched the main title. They put the main title sequence at the beginning, and then Tradition was after it. And then they also cut Far From the Home I Love. And I couldn't believe that they did that. But fortunately, of course, if you buy it on home video, it's all there. And then the last thing is, I may be just completely misremembering, but when the movie came out, I thought I read that some of it was filmed in the Ukraine. Is that not? No.
No,
It was two villages, primarily the one that we saw in Yugoslavia.
in Yugoslavia, yeah.
Yeah.
I see they were very concentration. The play. Why does anti-Semitism somehow impact its impact on the world? I know they talk about in the movie that there's family and there's tradition. It doesn't seem to be enough. We're still Jews, and people still don't like us. And I just wonder where, why it is so successful despite that.
The question
Please.
was, given, correct me if this is not a fair summation of the question, but the question is, how can this film be so popular among so many people when anti-Semitism is, so perpetual, persistent?
I would love for you to speak to that, Alisa.
I mean, it's a show, it's a movie. It can touch people's hearts at while they're experiencing it, but maybe the power. I don't know. I'm stuttering and stumbling because it's such a hard question. I mean, an artwork can't do the work of social change, right? It can it can prime things, it can underscore things, but I mean, I think we can say this for almost any community. I mean, if you think of how many African American artists are revered in American culture, and yet there's a persistence of racism as well, or any other community. I don't have an answer for you. Maybe
The verisimilitude, I mean, you people all over from different ethnic backgrounds become the characters, right? So they don't think they're identifying as a Jew. They're identifying with the universal issues that is so powerful in the music, right? And
yeah, but wouldn't you still think, though, that if you can identify yourself through a Jewish character or a black character or a Chinese American character or what have you, that it would give you a stronger sense of fellow feeling and human connection to people unlike oneself?
I think there are a few people out there like that because we had a screening last night and a gentleman waited a long time to say hello, and he told me, oh, this movie means so much to me from when I was a kid and I lived down south and I'm not Jewish and I'm so happy to see this. So I think there are maybe a few people around.
no, I think Neva's right, actually. I think it does scratch the surface. It's not going to eradicate anti-Semitism, but Norman Jewison did go to Israel specifically to meet with survivors of the Holocaust, of pogroms, to identify, to understand, to lean in to the kind of that cultural issues. So, and Jewison, this is the director did In the Heat of the Night, and after that, A Soldier Story and Hurricane. And he wanted to do the other
Nat Turner.
the Nat Turner story. He has tremendous empathy for humanity and did. I think there was an intention here for Jewison to show the violence, to show the pogroms, to show the Exodus.
Yeah, and I guess I agree. And the one more thing I would add is, as powerful as artwork can be, I mean, I think it can be in drawing our empathy for people unlike ourselves. Propaganda is stronger. Vile lies that give you explanations for things that are hard to understand, that allow you to blame someone else, I guess, are more powerful. Not in every case, thankfully, but are for some people are more powerful than even a work that can ask you to identify with someone unlike you.
We have another question here in the middle.
There's one down here as well. There are quite a few.
So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you because I grew up with Fiddler on the Roof. I'm from Australia, Melbourne, Australia, and we actually have a very large, Melbourne, a very, very large Polish Jewish community, and my grandparents were Russia, Poland, Russia. So it's just, I've just always loved that film, and just seeing the story behind the film was just so powerful to me. So just an opportunity to thank you. And just because it does go into little details, I was just really interested. It's such a small detail, but maybe you can shed light on it. When Bette Midler said for some reason they didn't want her in the film, and I thought, what? You know, when she rings up when she tells what was the name of the woman that plays Seitel?
Rosalind Harris.
When she says to Rosalind, look, they don't want me, you go for it. And I just thought, I wonder if you know why they didn't want Bette Midler to play it.
I don't. Do you happen to know?
I don't.
Neva? No? No.
Maybe
I thought I'd ask.
Maybe similar to not casting Zero. Maybe she was too larger than life. I don't know.
Or maybe they wanted someone younger. I don't know.
Or Three
point.
Village Girls that weren't great singers is kind of what John Williams, who was part of the casting, right? Was John Williams at the piano when you auditioned? Yeah, he speaks to that a little bit.
Another
Looking for
question.
great singers. Sorry, Neva, you are a great singer.
I was going to say.
It's okay.
But I'm speaking to Michelle Marsh's sort of.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Well, she did quite well, actually, Bette Midler.
I have a similar question. There were so many classic Jewish actors in Fiddler on the Roof, like Molly Pecan and the man who played the rabbi. He's a very famous Yiddish actor. Is there a reason that Danny Kaye was not in the movie at all? Maybe not as Tevye, but not as in any way whatsoever. Is there a
It was
specific
all or nothing
reason?
for Danny.
Oh,
Yeah.
so he offered other roles in the film?
Not that I know of.
No, but I hear that they did offer, the story goes, they did offer Fiddler to Jack Benny. But he was supposed to play the fiddler. And he wanted to play Tevye.
Here's another question.
It's actually two parts. I was really amazed at Chaim Topol. I lived in Israel off and on. Well, I went to Hebrew University from 61 to 65 and then again in 69. And I saw Chaim Topol on the stage many times. And he was of the style of Chana Maron, who they mentioned, big, big actors. And I was astounded at how he toned it down for the movie. I mean, I have other actor friends who've been on the stage and that, and they find it very difficult. So the other thing I have to say is in the period that I lived in Israel, people didn't want to talk about the Holocaust. They didn't want to revisit that. People with numbers on their arms covered them up. They didn't talk about their stories. And I was surprised at Golda's reaction because I had some interaction with Golda, and she was a fairly cold person. So I was surprised that you got the tear out of her. But it was a wonderful movie because all of those details about how it got made were just amazing.
And let me just quickly add, it is a movie. It is a work of entertainment. We'll get that. And I learned through Lisa's book that Anna Tevka was a creation. There was no shtetl, a purely Jewish shtetl, right?
Well, I mean, there were shtetl all over, but there was no single. I mean, there were some that were industrial, some that were agricultural, some that they weren't. What they all had in common was they weren't all Jewish. Right. They were mixed. They were villages that had Jews and non-Jews in them, but they had a predominant or critical mass of Jews in them. And if they had a study house and a bath and a cemetery, they were a shtetl. But they were of different sizes. And and after the war, what happened here was the kind of creation of an idealized single notion of a shtetl, and that happened really in the 50s with the creation of books like Life is with People, which was an ethnography of the shtetl, which was based on interviews of really the children of immigrants who came from all over the place, but they were sort of conglomerated in chapters together, so there wasn't distinctions, and also in the books of a scholar named Maurice Samuels, who was writing about that period, and those were the research materials that Sheldon and Jerry Bach and Joe Stein and Jerry Robbins were using to create the show, along with the photo books like the Roman Vishniac. Jerry Robbins was using the same ones that Norman Jewison was using. So a kind of idea of the shtetl grew up of the shtetl as a kind of single, fixed in amber kind of place was created and then solidified even more in Fiddler on the Roof in a way that, like, the Yiddish scholar, the purest Yiddish scholars still can't stand because it's not real.
And Jerome Robbins did have family from that same area, Belarus area, and he did go back as a boy, and then he did go to a large Jewish wedding where he saw all the male dancing. Mm-hmm. And I think the dance in the film is under-recognized, how well they portrayed the dance in the film, although you touch on it that they brought it back to Pinewood. But that, too, was kind of one of the first of its kind filming dance in that way, in that 360-degree way that you see Norman Jewison plot out.
Mm-hmm. And that the shtetl that Jerry Robbins's family came from is called Rozhanka, and that was like a little kiss Joe Stein gave him in that scene where they bring the newspaper and they say, "Look what happened in a village called Rozhanka." There you go. So the dance, you mentioned the dance, maybe that's something Robert Aberdeen, who's one of the original cast members from the Broadway production, is here, has a question or comment and maybe has something to say about the dance as well.
Yeah, I think we have time for one last question, comment.
I don't know. Hello. I was the Gentile. There are 3 in the show. 4. Then the priest got cut, and that left 3 of us. And I played 2 of them. I understand there was a time when Zero was turning it down. And during that time, they offered it to Danny Kaye. And Danny Kaye's people, I don't know if it got to Danny Kaye, but his people said, Mr. Kaye would not be interested in playing a milkman in Tsarist Russia. And eventually he came to be sorry. And he did 2 by 2 on Broadway, which was his attempt to get to play Tevye, which was not successful. But it was in the same theater, the Lyceum Theater, where we did the Gypsy Run-Through. Can I tell a quick story? I'm off stage left, that's over there. Zero was sitting down here at a table. Jerry was standing there like a dancer in first position. And I'm over, I said, what's happening? Because it's quiet all of a sudden. And with Zero, it was never quiet, you know. And Zero is just like the rhinoceros at the table, head down. And I said, what's going on? And Jerry's saying, Zero, you're the only one I ever wanted to do this part. And I said, what's going on? And people will say, you don't know? I know what? They're enemies. What do you mean they're enemies? Zero hates Jerry. Now, Austin Pendleton, Jerry worked with off-Broadway first, and Mama put you in the closet. What the hell is it? Oh, Dad, Poor Dad.
Poor Dad.
And Jerry wanted Austin to play Muttle so badly. Austin was at Lincoln Center with the repertory company, and he made the rehearsal schedule around Austin's availability. Austin was at Jerry's townhouse on the east side when he was on the phone to somebody saying, would someone tell Jerry this? Jerry says, will someone tell Zero that this would be really good for him? And I guess someone convinced him to do it. Anyway, there you go.
Thank you.
You see a picture of young Austin in Daniel's film tonight, so when you watch it again.
Yeah, there's a still of, it's Jerry Robbins and Austin and somebody else, I forget who already. But yeah.
And Austin is on Broadway now in The Minutes by
Yeah.
Tracy Letts.
Amazing, Austin. And we're still in touch with friends. When Austin didn't get the film, I just assumed he was busy because he's always busy. And I ran into him in Sheridan Square and I said, Austin, why weren't you? I found out I didn't get it because I had a crooked tooth. And Austin said, no, they didn't want me. I said, that's impossible. Everybody loves us. No, he said, I would love to have done it. They didn't want me. And a friend, Larry Ross, who was helping them cast, said Jewison didn't like anybody for Muttle, including
Leonard Fry?
Leonard. He didn't like Leonard, but Leonard was such a great raconteur that he entertained them so much with his stories at the audition that Jewison said, well, let's do Leonard. We know at least he'll keep us entertained in 4 months in Yugoslavia.
Right. I think that brings us pretty much to the end of the time that we have. Please join me in thanking Neva Small and especially Daniel Raim for his beautiful film.
And if you like this film, I have to do my plug for Daniel's film, Harold and Lily. And you saw the storyboard illustrations throughout? Well, he has a special film, which you have to go and watch now, Harold and Lily, and many other films on Cinema Artists, so you'll check them out.
Thank you, everyone.